In a second-hand set of dimensions, on an astral plane that was never meant to fly, through wavering star mists, see the Grey Satuin. Drifting onwards through space, atop the shell of the world's turtle, are 4 giant elephants, upon whose broad shoulders rests the Discworld. Welcome to Dining Table Discworld. We're reading through the Discworld novels and discussing them at our dining table. Be aware there will be spoilers for the current book and others in the series.
Hello, welcome to Dining Table Discworld. I'm Dave.
I'm Kathy.
And today we are on the 16th Discworld book. We are listening to some soul music, or reading some soul music as the case may be. This was published in 1994. Kathy, what's the synopsis?
Susan becomes an orphan while she's at boarding school, and takes the news stoically. Then a skeletal rat shows up, and gradually reveals the family's secret, her grandfather Death, the Grim Reaper. When he goes missing, she is taken to his house by his horse, and expected to do the duty, but with less training than her father Mort had. Meanwhile, Imp is a country bard come to the big city to make music, but after arriving at Ankh-Morpork, he finds it's more complicated and expensive than he expected. Teaming up with fellow musicians, Glod and Cliff, to do some unofficial gigs, Imp ends up with a magical guitar, and the band creates something new. Music with rocks in. Ankh-Morpork and the cities of the Stowe Plains go wild for it. Imp becomes increasingly consumed by the music, and Susan increasingly concerned with saving him, be it from the Musicians Guild, gangsters, fans, or the plans of the music itself. Content note: this book contains themes of grief, bereavement, and the death of parents, which we will discuss towards the end of the episode.
Okay, so what were your first thoughts?
So the thing with soul music is I've definitely read the book once, maybe twice before, but my main memory of it is actually the cartoon version, because I bought that on VHS, obviously quite some time ago. So reading it was interesting because there are various bits where characters had accents, or there were lines that were specifically used in the cartoon versions. There are various bits of dialogue which I could kind of hear as much as read. So it was interesting to sort of see which bits were and weren't in there and which were included. Not that I've watched that recently, because again it was on VHS and I don't have a video player anymore. But I did enjoy it. I kind of knew that there'd probably be more stuff I kind of got now than when I was a teenager, just because of having a bit more knowledge of some of that type of music. Obviously it's the introduction of Susan, who's another major female character in Discworld. I don't think I kind of liked her as much as I liked some of the other female characters, but yeah, she was fine. I enjoyed it. Yeah. How about you?
Yes, it's one of the death books, so I generally like the death books. Again, Susan is a great character who gets introduced. It's always fun when Sir Terry does the whole, Discworld does something from our world. Moving pictures was fun. This one is a little bit more embedded in the world than perhaps Moving Pictures.
Yeah. I tend to think of this one, Moving Pictures, as a pair in that way.
Yes, very much so.
But, I mean, Moving Pictures, and I think this was mentioned before we did it, is the one that sort of started to reward people who'd been reading prior stuff. That's where we started getting very referential within Discworld, as well as referential to stuff in Roundworld. This, obviously, it's more embedded, because at this point in the series, there is a lot more of that going on. You're
building off, Ankh-Morpork is the city. We get to expanded characters that we've seen briefly or mentioned before, So, yeah, great stuff. Yes, I remember the cartoon as well. Shame that never really properly got re-released.
Yeah. I imagine you probably didn't watch it quite as much as I did.
No, that could be said for most things, to be fair. Definitely a fun read, and thoroughly enjoyed it. So, where are we going to start?
Characters, I guess. Maybe if we start with Susan.
Yeah.
As it's her introduction, she becomes a recurring character. I say that the star of the books, I suppose she's always in a book which has her grandfather in, and then usually there's some other whole thing happening.
Yes.
And it's notable because the versions we have are the Josh Kirby covers. Susan isn't even on the cover of this book.
No.
I don't think she's even on the back. It's just the band.
No, that's the band. I
can see if we've got a version.
There's the Wizards. No, it's not. You couldn't even say...
We may have a calendar that has the full art without all the words, but she doesn't seem to be on it.
She's under the barcode, which... don't know what that then says about...
This is kind of my point a bit. There's a lot of, I guess, similarities with Susan and Mort, because he's her father and their roles in their books, but this is not called Susan, and it's not even mostly about Susan, although she is a major part of it, and is... Again, it's that whole kind of coming of age thing, which Mort very much was. This feels less that. You know, they're both 16 when they're called to be deaf. They both want to save an attractive person of the opposite sex. But in her case, it gets a bit more complicated than just making an error. She does kind of tell Albert something's up, which shows a bit more sense than Mort, who was just like, no, everything's fine.
I can deal with this.
So it's a bit less bravado, but that maybe due to gender stuff. But she does also decide to sort things out herself. So a certain amount of stubbornness, in both. Also with Susan, it seems like she's kind of been primed for self-reliance. And also there's been this whole thing where she's got a lot of reliance on logic because her parents are making it she get an education. And also that she not be, I guess, influenced by any like supernatural occult stuff in the family.
Which, I mean, I can certainly see that her parents wanting to be less engaged, having her less embedded within the strange world of
the Grim Reaper.
And certainly you can see, that obviously they did spend time, she did spend time as a small child around in Death's domain.
It sounded like he kind of insisted on it and they brought her along thinking, she'll get upset and we'll leave. And then she enjoyed it.
Yes, which worried them more, I think.
Yeah, and then they're like, nope, no more of this.
Yeah, he's got bony knees.
Well, that's the thing that is alluded to in the book, but is actually portrayed a bit in the cartoon, that she uses, like, grandfather's ribcage as a xylophone.
Yes, but I think also the thing with the swing.
Yeah.
The idea that Death wants to create a swing and create it himself, not just get someone else to come in, because throughout they talk about Death's house and how he can't create.
Yes, there's a whole bit where Susan wanders around and looks at this house that she must have stayed in when she's very small but doesn't really remember, and she goes to her mother's bedroom and sees what her mother's room was like, and it's clear that she finds it all a bit silly, which in fairness Isabel kind of was, but we've discussed how difficult her situation was. When she looks at Death stuff, he's got a bedroom. Does he sleep? He's got combs. He don't have hair. He's a skull.
He knows, the bathroom is not plumbed in correctly, or at least it was plumbed, but they had to get a plumber in to plumb it in, because he knows what a bathroom looks like but doesn't know
how it functions.
Yeah. So the swing is his attempt to actually...
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit where she looks at his desk. It looks like a desk, but doesn't understand desk-ishness. Because you've got stuff like, you've got a blotter, but it's hard. It's just like, these are the shapes. It's very, surface level. It's very like, this is what these things look like. But they're not for using. So it's just, it's like a prop or a set or something, I think.
They mentioned bits about the swing throughout. And it's not until later that you see the swing, which is basically through a tree.
Yes, he took out the middle of the tree... And put the swing in there and then propped either side of the tree up.
Because he knew to have it to be stable, it had to be across two strong branches, but those were on the other side of the tree. So obviously that failed. So then he chopped the middle out so you could swing in between, but then had to prop the rest of the tree up.
There's almost a sort of childishness to some of the logic. And I say childishness not in like a necessarily juvenile way, but they're just not having experience in things way. It's like, he's seen a lot of bedrooms, it mentioned, which, yes, he would have done. But again, having stuff in it, that's another thing. There's various things that don't open or things that don't operate because they're not functional, they're just visual. Yeah.
And I think coming back to Susan, I think that her parents would kind of looked at the swing and went, a bit too much of a risk to be around it, because it just...
I think they just didn't want.
It's too odd. It's too they wanted Susan to be and I'm going to use air quotes here, a normal child, and I think that they had ideas about education stuff, and I can see Isabel wanting to get away from her childhood because it did seem like it was probably a bit weird and stifling. Again, childhood in inverted commas.
Her much extended, weirdly shaped childhood, but again might explain why she doesn't feel very. I don't know. I mean, Susan was sent off to school a lot. It got the impression she didn't see her parents tons, and that they were mostly focused on trying to make sure there's peace on the stow plains, which was kind of almost the task they'd been given at the end of Morse. A bit like, well, history's been changed, but somebody still needs to make peace. I guess won't be rising up against this terrible guy. And also, again, more, having been a farmer's son and briefly an apprentice to death, he doesn't have much idea of higher education.
Yeah.
I say higher education, not like university, but more like education for like rich people. Because obviously Susan, when her parents actually becomes the Duchess of Stow-Heelot, though we never really hear anything about any Duchessing that she does.
No. I think she avoids it.
Well, yeah, we'll have to look elsewhere for Duchessing later.
Yes.
But I mean, it's quite common for people like nobility to send their children away for education. Like that's just a thing that happens throughout various bits of history. One thing that struck me this time, I mean, the point is Susan's a bit of an odd kid, and maybe it's just that. She seemed like she probably wasn't neurotypical in this, but a lot of the ways that seemed to have been written, it seemed like the stuff that's normally stereotypically a bit male.
Yeah.
Which makes you think, I don't know that necessarily Sir Terry was specifically writing that, but just that she's a bit of an odd kid who has a different view to everyone else, and stuff like she isn't that bothered about the other girls. She's got a couple of friends, but it kind of seems like because they're the ones that are also a little bit outcast, because they're not human. She has this very direct thing. She's a bit like, well, I'm interested in these things and not those things.
Yeah.
And then there's also the powers. The book starts with a tragedy, obviously Susan's parents dying in this coach accident, interspersed with her head mistress preparing to speak to Susan. But there's this thing, whenever Susan doesn't want you to pay attention to her, she just disappears and you can't see her, and after a while you forget she's even there, which obviously is a thing that her grandfather does almost all the time, and her father kind of picked up as he went through his apprenticeship. And so in some classes she's there and she's alert and she's attentive, in other classes she's not bothered about, she just reads other books and like she isn't there. So it's kind of this idea that kids will do well in the subjects they're interested in and not so good in the ones they're not, but kind of taken to the extreme that it's not that she isn't even trying. It seems like she's not there, but she is, but she's just not interested, so she sort of disappears.
It fades away. Yeah. Yes, we see a bit of hereditary powers being passed down,
which is
which are not only that, physical features as well, which.
Yes, that's true. Well, again, it's all a little bit odd.
But I think that just adds to the level mythic, of outlaw, and obviously Susan herself is a bit of a she's got white hair with a black streak.
Yes.
She's
she has those 3 marks on her cheek that sort of appear when she blushes, and then later on in the book she discovers that that's where her grandfather slapped her father, and Mort had 3 lines from that, and she's somehow passed down. Death slapped him so hard it passed down to his descendants.
True, yes.
Which I guess is sort of badass.
Yes. So Susan, I think it's a very likeable character, relatable to a degree. I mean,
I think so. I think she's a little bit. She's got a coldness to her, and there's an element of her disdaining things quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I can see that there's an element of her being, I'm not interested in that, I'm not good at that. Meh. Like, she disdains it somewhat. Also, she seems a bit scornful of other people. Like, she doesn't sort of see them as... This is the thing, she's a bit distant.
Certainly at the start, I think that this book kind of helps to kind of... But then again, as I say, who wouldn't like the ability to just be ignored when you want to finish your book?
It does sound quite good,
Yeah.
I think the thing is, she has got quite a lonely life, but I feel like that's been set partly maybe as a defence mechanism, maybe just because she does disappear a bit.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say briefly about her friends, just because it's early on in the book, and then we'll get to more other stuff. Because the girls she ends up... I say friends, and I think it doesn't really even occur to her massively that they're friends, because the school is mostly for the children of human ability, but there is 1 dwarf and 1 troll, and they are her friends in that you have to go in 3s to go to town, and the 3 of them sort of end up together, I think, out of some sort of selection of everyone else not picking them.
Yeah.
And the head mistress is like, oh, very, 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 very good that you've been such good chums with them, as though thinking that it's some sort of, oh, it's nice that she's made friends with these non-human girls, and Susan's been like, what? But... So there's Princess Jade, whose father is a troll king. And then there is, interestingly, Gloria Thog's daughter. And I have a little bit of a headcanon here, because obviously Pratchett's not written his book about dwarf gender stuff yet, but I guess it's coming. It has been alluded to so far that dwarves say he all the time. That the reason you don't see their women, as a sort of bigoted rich person said in the previous book, is that they all have beards. Like, there's not much sexual dimorphism in dwarves, even less so than humans. They all have beards, they all wear leather, they all carry axes, they all have helmets.
They all like gold.
They all like gold. And we've discussed before how most of the dwarves we've seen so far are not like other dwarves, but in different ways. But it's interesting that Gloria's obviously been sent to this human girls' school, and I kind of wonder that maybe the reason Gloria has been sent to be educated at a human school is because she's Gloria. and maybe something very progressive is happening, but the humans have no idea because they've got no understanding of the culture.
Yeah.
Because there's a thing about how she has like a foot-long beard that's plaited with ribbons in the school colour, but she's clearly wearing girls' clothes. You know, she's being referred to as she and all that. Because so far, other than the slight oddness of Minty, the sort of dwarf that Carrot liked before he kind of was sent away from home, all the people that kind of refer to dwarf gender are humans who aren't raised that way and therefore perhaps wouldn't understand and would, I guess, just maybe assign gender in their own way, mentally and perhaps incorrectly. But the point is dwarves are all he, so the fact that you've got a she... Again, it's a bit of, I don't think Pratchett figured this out yet, but I just quite like the headcanon. Actually, the existence of Gloria is incredibly progressive, and maybe that's why she's being educated in human society. And in fact, most of the dwarves we've met that most live in human society are not like other dwarves in some way, like Hwel and Cassanunda.
Given...
So that's my headcanon anyway.
But, given her surname, which is obviously a gendered...
Thogsdor, yeah, but...
Yeah, we're seeing some...
Yes, but so is Gloria. I think that's the name she's chosen.
Yeah, yes,
presumably her father's Thog, so, yeah.
No. Well, the point I'm making is that if they would have... they've actually come up with a...
Yeah, well, I guess they're saying it in human. So,
yeah. It's one of those,
Because you think it's like Glodson.
Yeah, I know, that's...
Yeah,
but the point is that they have... If you're only referring to everyone as a male, you wouldn't have words for...
No, daughter. No, they probably picked them up from humans. But I think that's also where the names come from as well, to be honest. But yeah.
I think you're right. It's an interesting thought.
The thing with this is that there's a sort of trio of girls early on, but then Susan goes to herself and we barely ever hear from the others again once she leaves the school, which is a bit of a shame because I sort of almost feel like there could have been like a trio of girls as a kind of mirror to the trio of guys, because there's a human, a dwarf and a troll in the band, and that just doesn't happen.
No.
So this isn't, although Susan's a main character, she's very much isolated, and it does otherwise feel mostly like a masculine book.
She's got Death of Rats.
I don't know that we know the gender of Death of Rats.
Well, no,
he's normally referred to as he.
Yeah. And the Raven.
Also referred to as he.
And Binky.
Also a he.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see my point. Anyway, shall we go on to the band?
Yes. The band. So we have a classic quartet who then, loses one member as soon as they become famous.
I wouldn't say it's a classic quartet. I'd say it's a trio that gains one member for, like, a performance.
So we'll start with Impy
Kellen.
Yeah, Minky Kellen. Go with
Sellen?
that. Imp Sellen. I think it's supposed to be Imp.
I think it's Kellen anyway.
Yeah. Who is from Clamados. We're going to get our Welsh double L's in. Who is a Clamados is full of druids and he's a bard. He won the most recent Eisteddfod.
Eisteddfod.
Yes. And
see, that's actually a real Welsh thing.
Yeah, it is very much. And so he comes to Ankh-Morpork to basically play and find his fame and fortune in music.
Yes, because where he's from, everyone's a druid, which means like mining and quarrying and
building stone things.
Building stone circles.
And it's very wet.
It's very rainy.
So, obviously, Clamados is Wales.
I don't think it's on the Atlantic coast of Discworld because they don't have one, but yes, Clamados is Wales. Also, he's done the thing that Dylan Thomas did in Under Milkwood, where he's given the name, and if you spell it backwards, it's something rather ruder. So yeah, he's this very provincial lad who comes to the big city, and it doesn't quite go right, but he's got his head full of dreams and music, and that's what he wants to devote his life to, and people in his family don't understand. And at first, they do this in the cartoon, he clearly has a Welsh accent, but the way that Pratchett discerns that is all the L's are doubled.
Which is very odd when you've got words with double L in them already.
Yeah, like all.
It's a nice visual word, and
a visual of showing the accent.
Yeah, Pratchett's very good at those kind of word gags,
and he does more accenty stuff as he goes through. Yeah. Let's face it, but we've not got to the Scottish folk yet.
No,
but
yes,
so this is
sorry.
But again, because I've watched the cartoon, I'm not great with accents, but myself at all. But because I've watched the cartoon, and in the cartoon you've got Imp, who's Welsh, or he starts out sounding Welsh, and you've got Glod, who, not in the book, but in the cartoon is from Liverpool. Well, he's not from Liverpool, and he's got a Scouse accent, so you just got this quite fun. So there's various bits when they were talking where if I could hear the accents, I was like, this is one bit they put straight in the cartoon, because I can hear it as well. It's interesting because throughout the book, Pratchett has him doing his Welsh accent less and less. So I guess it's Clamados accent, but less and less because the L's reduce. It starts, I think, about page 47.
Yeah.
And then it gets less and less. And then for a lot of the book, he doesn't speak very much, let's face it.
No.
And then there's just a bit at the end when he kind of comes to himself again. Also, there's so many musical jokes in this, but the joke is that imp means bud, and Kellen means of the holly. And then he goes by the name Buddy, and it's like, yes.
Yes, we see where this is going.
I mean, at one point, Pratchett also, he did that thing where it's like people describing later says a thing quite early on, and he does refer to it as the day the music died, and it's like, okay.
Yeah. And he looks a bit elvish.
Oh, yes, everyone's like, oh, it looks a bit elvish around the hair or the ears.
Yes.
Which will be a very terrible joke at the very end of the book.
So yes, it's Im's kind of odd. I'm going to say not so much driving force as...
He's like the vessel.
Vessel for the force.
It's for the music.
So yes, just touch on the other two members of the band.
We'll just say, so Imp, and like the body, he plays a harp, he has this very old harp, and it gets damaged, and so they have to go...
It's a very new harp.
Oh, no, that's the point, yes.
Very new harp, but it was exceptional. It was really, the craftsman
he wanted in there
sat for weeks under a waterfall to make it. Why? I have no idea.
I think it's just this very bardic thing.
Yeah.
And the point is that an instrument, a harp's supposed to be around for 100 years before it's good or something, because it's all very traditional. So he starts playing, but then the Musicians Guild nope, and then he ends up in the waiting room of the Musicians Guild and meets the other two. So you've got Glodson, who's a dwarf, and he plays the horn. And then in the cartoon he's like, again with the accents, like, I can blow anything, me. And Imp, it says, searching for something polite, says, that must make you very popular. And apologies to anyone from Liverpool or Wales, because I'm not good at accents and I'm doing it remembered from a cartoon I watched a very long time ago. And Glod is basically nature's session musician.
Yes.
He does enjoy what happens, but mostly the money. What he wants to do is have a regular gig where he can play his music and he can get paid.
Yeah.
And he knows that the next day somebody will ask him to play music and pay him again. And that's what he wants. Although the fame does get to him somewhat.
I think mainly the gold.
Yeah. And then you have Laius, who then changed his name to Cliff, because obviously we know a lot of musicians just change their names.
And he wanted more trolly.
Yes. And he plays rocks.
Yes.
Which is why they then become the band with rocks in, and why it then becomes music with rocks in, and basically percussion, drummer.
Yes.
And interestingly, again, just coming off of Men-at-Arms, where you've got the whole dwarf troll, long-term species hatred, Laius almost immediately is a bit like, well, no, it's fine, for you are both musicians,
yes,
and I am a musician. It's kind of like, well, we are musicians, and that is, the kind of people we are, so our species doesn't really matter.
We're musicians first, and our species second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, yes, briefly, the librarian is in it on piano. Is it still a piano after you've mutilated it that much?
I don't...
Half a piano.
Some keys, and it makes a noise, but it doesn't really matter given the music. The music kind of takes over a bit.
Yeah.
These are great stand-ins for a lot of bands from certainly the early...
It's the horn bit that's a bit different, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that is a bit more unusual.
It's not ska. But that's the main thing I can think of. It's like, well, there are guitars and there's a horn. It's like, is it ska? It's not ska. I don't think Pratchett was necessarily into that. There's no reference to it, but that's just...
No.
Also, you need quite a few guys with horns at that point, I think.
You do, yeah.
But yeah, it's the point you've got this temporarily four piece, and you've got the lead singer who's also the guitarist, because that's the thing. Obviously, they go to the mysterious shop and get something with strings for, Buddy to play.
Because Cliff sits on the harp.
Yeah.
And yes, they have to go and find this. So we get another mystical travelling shop.
This one's just music, though.
Yeah, and it just contains lots of exceedingly powerful and ridiculous magic items.
But all instruments.
Yes, some of which would cause the end of the world. This one arguably caused the start of it, but we'll get to that later.
Yes, well, the old lady says, don't blow on that unless you want us to be... Oh, I think there's a pipe. And she said, don't blow on that, you want us to be knee-deep in rats. And Glod's like, well, I'm not hungry, because obviously dwarves eat rats. It just occurs to me, you probably could do something with Death of Rats and a dwarf eatery, but I don't think he ever does.
No.
But I don't know if they get them fresh or not, but
yeah. Anyway, so they've got this, and in this guitar is the music. And this is where they go out, so they go and perform, and the music takes them over. Which is, I think, is a bit of a metaphor for when musicians play and kind of let the music, channel what. But in this case, it is a primordial force of creation, and it wants to be let out, and it wants to, and it kind of, they don't actually know what they're going to start playing, and they just start playing, and it takes them over, and then it just happens, and crazy stuff happens around them.
I mean, I feel like they're in Kieran Gillen graphic novels that also go into this in much more detail.
So we are referencing a lot of. So we've got a Buddy Holly reference right early on.
Elvish, because they keep saying you look elvish. Yeah.
And so it starts with them playing what is obviously Elvis and Buddy Holly and early rock and roll.
Yeah. And the point is that they need, you have to get money to be in the Musicians Guild, but they can't make money unless they play. But you don't have to play unless you're in the Musicians Guild. So and that's kind of the whole predatory record company music industry thing. Yes. So they're they're the antagonists who are always chasing around trying to take them out. So they have to play in risky venues where the guild won't go.
Yeah. And I suppose at this point we get reintroduced to Mr. CMOT Dibbler.
Yes, again, much like in Moving Pictures. Well, I feel like Vetinari has learned a bit. Because in Moving Pictures, he had no clue who Vincent and Ginger were. Victor and Ginger?
Victor.
Why do I always get those confused? And then he was, of course, same as everyone else. So I feel like he's learned now, and he's very aware that Dibbler and the Wizards are basically barometers for a load of weird stuff that's happening.
Yeah. If Dibbler starts selling you something slightly even odder than normal, and the Wizards are doing something stranger than normal, then you've got problems.
Yes, because the Wizards watch the show and then they get quite affected by it, I guess, because maybe they're sensitive to this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's been said.
Except Ridcully, who basically, I think, down his soul is the disapproving dad who comes on at the beginning of the Twisted Sister video.
Yes, he is definitely that kind of. He doesn't get the this kind
What are you kids doing?
Yes, stop making a noise.
It's not like you never say.
True, but slightly differently.
Yes, the Wizards, despite all being 60s and up, are behaving like rebellious teens and doing a lot of odd stuff. And again, I think picking up whatever's coming from the music and the vibe of it. So there's making cloaks out of leather and putting studs on things and I'm going to go to my room and trying to
Born to Rune.
Yes, Born to Rune.
Because you couldn't fit Born to Eat Big Dinners on the back of his jacket.
Yes, live fats die yoga new. Because you can't really say live fast, die young when you're in your sort of 70s or whatever, but the letters are all there, just muddled up. So most of the faculty gets quite into it to the point where then Ridcully has to turn to Pondus Dibbons and some actual students.
We do see some students. We'll get back to Dibbler in a bit. Yes, we do get to see some Stibbons. We do get to see some students led by Pondus Dibbons in the high energy facility.
Which, again, I think is just the computer science block, because this is written in the 90s, the computer science block back when everyone was but what is this, though?
I mean, it has been referenced, in Moving Pictures and Men at Arms.
I think it's mentioned briefly.
Yeah, the point is...
that's not very wizardy, which is fine.
No, but the high energy building has been mentioned a few times.
That's where Gaspo said he was sleeping.
Yeah, definitely in Moving Pictures. And definitely later on, it's mentioned as somewhere that the faculty don't really understand.
I don't think it's mentioned in Moving Pictures, because that's when Pond's still a student.
It's definitely mentioned a couple of times.
I think
it's somewhere that they don't understand that these things are going on in there. That
I think it's mentioned in Lords and Ladies, because Pond is in that more.
Yeah,
that's the book he comes back in, and then I think it's referred to.
So we get to go inside and meet some of the students who are. Yeah,
I mean, one of them's described as basically having so much hair you can't really tell which way he's facing apart from his nose poking out, which is then basically exactly how he's drawn in the cartoon. You're no, that seems accurate.
Yeah. We don't really see a lot of these characters. They're just kind of there as backdrop. But the most important thing we do see is an ant calculator, which later on we will see. This is a precursor to the great computer Hex, which I quite enjoy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought it's one of your favourite characters if it's a character.
Oh, definitely a character.
Okay, but it's not a character yet, it's just a load of ants in tubes.
Yes, just an ant in tubes doing very basic sums. But that's how they start.
Yeah.
So yes, we get the faculty going and being odd, which is like everyone else. So basically anyone who hears the music with Roxy, it kind of gets taken. So the ladies from the
staff at the university
go and end up dressing strangely, and the housekeeper.
They've got the beehive hairdos.
Yeah, and the housekeeper, who's got a shorter skirt on. Obviously not a mini skirt, but it's you can see her ankles kind of, which is very, very...
Yes, the wizards being as they are.
Yeah.
But the stuff about also throwing under things on the stage.
Yes.
Which is, again, classic kind of rock and roll. It doesn't actually seem to sort of have the female fan stuff so much. I think it's just people are generally go a bit crazy for them. But again, it's sort of referencing the way people react to Elvis, Beatlemania. He's just not kind of done the feminized bit of it so much. Like, it's referenced, like it's mentioned that, you know, the band are getting attention, but that doesn't seem to be part of the story.
They talk about that type of girl that follows bands around, so there is the idea of a groupie, but we
don't see it.
No, because it's basically Susan, really.
Well, Susan gets accused of that without really knowing what it was. But I don't think Impri or Buddy really knew what it was.
No, we drifted off from me mentioning about Dibbler, because Dibbler turns up, and we get to see another of his money-making schemes that...
Well, it's Dibbler being the predatory manager character, which is also what he did in pictures.
Yes, and attempting to make as much money as he could in the shortest space of time.
And then, because Glod's interested in the money, but obviously Dibbler is absolutely exploiting them, because based on the history of things, that's kind of what record labels sort of do. But Buddy says music should be free, and he wants as many people as possible to listen to. He says there has to be a festival that's free, and Dibbler's like, free? And he's like, wait, we could sell so much merch.
Merchandising!
Then he gets a troll to print a load of t-shirts, and he's amazed that you can get people to pay to wear advertising. It's like, if you just put words on a t-shirt, they'll buy it.
Which, again, is shockingly true.
Well, it's kind of normal now, but I think at some point it was quite unusual.
So it's nice to see Dibbler around doing Dibbler stuff. I mean, as a character, he doesn't grow or change. He just does Dibbler stuff.
Well, I think there's him, the faculty, Nobby and Colon, who do appear briefly. They're all fixed points. They're like, these guys are going to be this way. That's how they are. But again, Dibbler and the faculty very good as barometers for weird stuff.
So this book, in some respects, is a little bit of a rehash of the previous two Death books.
I mean, especially what it's like Mort's 2.
Yes.
Mort's daughter.
Insofar as Death's job in this is to don't do death.
Death takes a holiday.
Yeah, he decides for whatever reason, and in this case, we'll talk about later, it's his inability to process his emotions over Isabel and Mort's death. So he goes off and does non-death things.
I mean, I suppose in Reaper Man he's forced into retirement.
It's slightly different.
In Mort it does seem to be, how do humans have fun? And now it's like, how do humans forget?
Yes.
Because I suppose in Mort the whole point is he suddenly seems to have some leisure time, whereas this is a bit more like him just kind of going off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
is how Susan gets pulled in, because of course Susan's living her very logical, slightly lonely boarding school life, and then suddenly the Death of Rats turns up, and then gets a Raven to help translate for him, and then Bink is there, and then suddenly Susan's taken to his house, and and having to do the duty with even less training.
Yeah, so Death wanders around. So his attempts to forget. I mean, his first attempt is the Clatchin Foreign Legion, which is obviously...
It's quite a dated reference, isn't it?
Yeah, a riff on...
I feel like I know that from very old cartoons.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of the French Foreign Legion... I'm not sure, this is...
I feel like it's some sort of colonial occupying force in deserty places that were owned by France at some point. But it was also... I feel like there's some Laurel and Hardy stuff around that. Again, it's like this very old thing. But yes, it didn't go there to forget. But before that, though, he goes and talks to that sage guy.
Yeah.
It's this whole idea that he goes and sort of says, well, how do you forget? Because there's supposed to be this mystic sage who knows everything, and he climbs a mountain to get there, and then... But then Death keeps arguing with him about things he's saying. And there's a great bit about what colour is the infinite. It's like, it's black. And Death's like, no, it's blue. He's like, no, it's black. And Death's like, when seen from the outside, it's blue. And then by the end, the mystic guy's waiting for some more regular tourists to come along.
Can I have some easier questions, please? So we get him wandering off to the Clatchin Foreign Legion, which is,
Yeah, it's clearly based on something that was kind of dated at the time, I think, but which in fact the music and rocks and stuff is as well, but that's more...
I think that feels more relevant than
that's what the book's about.
Yeah,
there's just the idea there's all these guys in a fort who keep forgetting stuff.
Because of all the sand and, get attacking.
I think it's not really clear what it's because of. I think there's more of a joke here that I don't get because it wasn't in the few things I watched that referenced it.
And they keep getting attacked by this other group.
Well, it's some sort of nomadic desert tribe, which again is probably a bit iffy. I feel like the French Foreign Legion. It's not a current reference.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure this really hits as a...
No. It mentions... because the wise man says various things people try. So, Clatchin Foreign Legion, drinking the waters of a mystical river, which sort of reference Leith. Is it Leith? Lethe? I can't remember how to say it. I don't remember how it's spelled. But again, the river in the Greek underworld that people drink to forget their past lives. which it kind of mentions briefly but kind of passes right over, really. And then he says stuff about imbibing a lot of alcohol, and that bit feels a lot like the bit in Mort, where again, for fun, he's told drink a lot of alcohol, and it's like he has again ended up at the drum drinking them dry, and it feels a bit like, well, yeah, I've kind of seen this a bit before.
We've done
He did this before, once for fun, once to forget. Neither time did it quite seem to work.
No, it does feel a little bit of a repetitive and doesn't give us anything new, because we know that Death can't get drunk until he wants to, and then you get a bit of drunk Death, but
it's probably kind of putting it on a bit, like when you used to drink when you were a teenager and you just be like, oh, I'm so drunk, and it's like, we probably weren't that drunk actually, but...
no.
I think the Collection for Illusion bit they just put as like one scene in the cartoon.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much in there originally.
No, but there was more of it than I was expecting, to be honest.
So, I mean, towards the end, he ends up hanging out, though, with the canting crew.
Who are introduced in this book.
Yes, this is that. So this is part of the Beggars Guild. We've heard of Foul Old Ron before and his smell.
Yeah.
We now get to meet Foul Old Ron and his smell.
And his smell is now a separate entity.
Yes.
Which it wasn't before.
Which is, having worked with the public and have met certain people that personal hygiene could be higher up on their priority list, I know what he's getting at with the idea of this smell.
It is something that happens.
It does, yeah, and obviously a lot of people, they can't help it, so we're not judging them for it. But certainly from a physical perspective, we know where
Yeah. So I mean, there's a few of them, and they're all introduced here. So you got Coughing Henry, Arnold Sideways, and the Duck Man. My headcanon is that the duck is the one from Moving Pictures.
Yeah.
Because that duck became intelligent but couldn't talk. They've hung out with him for a while. They call him, was it Mr... They give him his own name. He kind of goes around with them because their whole thing is being so unpleasant that people kind of pay them to go away. I mean, it sort of says the Beggars Guild in this, but I feel like in later books they actually aren't the Beggars Guild anymore. They're just their sort of own operatives or something.
Yeah.
Like the guild's almost too organised for them. They're a small community. They share things and they go around together, and Death's part of them lives with them for a while. And
Mr. Scrub.
Yes, Mr. Scrub. But yes, at the end when Death's about to leave them, he does, why do you have that duck on your head?
Yes.
And he's like, what duck?
Which is then the joke from then on.
Yes, the Duckman largely seems sane apart from that.
And I think from these characters is kind of the idea that you can have absolutely nothing and be perfectly content.
Well, yeah, they're happy enough with what they've got. I suppose they're people that probably do need some sort of help, but it's just not there.
Yes.
Which, I mean, considering where you work and that you get that sort of thing, it's
we still this is not a new problem. It's still just a problem.
Yeah. Introduce some more characters there. Each book that's in Ankh-Morpork seems to, you get characters repeating even if it's odd bits. You're like, oh, it's these guys, know these guys, and then you get new bits and pieces added in, so it just kind of builds up. Another thing that's introduced in this book is tooth fairies.
Yes.
Because Susan would like to be very logical and sensible of that, but she did at one point see a lady climb into the dormitory and take another girl's tooth, and no one seemed to notice but her. And then a couple of times when she's trying to deny that she has anything special about her, despite, a bony rat coming and talking to her.
And a very, very, very white horse that seems to follow her around.
I think Binky's one thing I actually quite liked about it.
Yeah, that's true.
She basically sees one of the tooth fairies, and then some people think she's a tooth fairy because people of a sort of supernatural or occult bent can see her and see that she's something different, that people can kind of recognise each other. And so some people assume she's a tooth fairy because it's a franchise, and basically so girls will go and in different areas and collect the teeth, and so you have to have a ladder and you've got your change, and sometimes you need some pliers because you can't make the change. Well, the teeth and the money got to add up. But yes, regular people can't see them. But it's again, that's a thing that we built on later.
And then true, we get actually another couple of references because we get the reference the Hogfather is talked about further.
Yes,
as well.
This is. I think like he's setting up a lot of the later books because there's a whole footnote that explains what the Hogfather is and how it's very kind of pork products based.
Yes,
you'll get sausages and pork pies in your maybe stocking. I can't remember. So yes, the Hogfather is definitely mentioned. I think it's mentioned. It's sort of described in a footnote, but then mentioned a couple of times as another sort of like the Hogfather or the Tooth Fairy, and it's like, well, these are things that exist, but you're sort of told maybe don't. Oh, actually, the other thing I like about the Hogfather footnote is it goes according to rural legend, which I quite liked as opposed to urban legends. There's various things he sort of mentioned this. The listening monks get mentioned again. I think they've been mentioned once before, but I can't quite remember where.
Well, they were mentioned. So Mort takes the abbot.
Those weren't the listening monks, were they?
Yeah.
It's just an abbot.
No, it's the listening monks.
Well, because it's not the history monks eventually.
To the encyclopedia. So it's the...
companion. It does say it started in Mort, yeah. It doesn't say, it is mentioned in Mort, but I'm not sure if that's the Abbot.
I'm pretty certain it was the Abbot.
Okay. I thought that was the History Monk Abbot because he turns up later, but I guess he's just recycling the whole Dalai Lama thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the Listening Monks get mentioned again. I suppose if this is fairly direct sequel to Mort. A bit of Mort appears in it, but we'll get to that for the end bit. It mentions the listening monks, what they're listening to, and because it's the music, sort of says, just in the narration, that the listening monks hear something that is like 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh no, you never got up to 4.
Oh, I thought I didn't know. Okay.
Okay, no, it's so the
1, 2, 1. Yeah,
the sound check is just 1, 2, 1, 2.
Yeah.
And then 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's the counting and then the...
Yeah. The thing is, it sort of seems to be kind of like gravitational waves in some way, which I'm quite proud of myself for even guessing, because I don't normally know this kind of physicsy stuff.
Yeah, as I said...
Because they're trying to listen to the start of the universe, aren't they? They think it's still out there somewhere.
There's a number of things in physics where you kind of need to be looking for neutrinos. You have to be in a really deep mine and things. So there are lots of physics things where it's kind of this looking into the history, trying to see the start of the universe, doing it from very remote places. So
part of the story is obviously that Susan wants to save him, Buddy, but then the music saves him. She's there to collect him. So again, a bit like her dad with Princess Kelly. But then the music saves him first. But then because the rest of people are out to get him for all sorts of reasons, mostly financial, which he doesn't notice because he's barely there for a lot of the book in some respect. But she keeps kind of helping him, and then after a while he can sort of see her, and they talk a bit, but she sort of keeps trying to save him.
Well, I mean, she's there at the start when the music kind of takes over there, so they're playing their first gig in the mended drum, and what's supposed to happen is a knife is supposed to bounce off Cliff and hit him, Buddy, and kill him. But it doesn't, because the music protects him.
And then Susan has this life timer, and rather than sound trickling through, the top bulb's all just like buzzing music.
Yeah.
Because the guitar that Buddy has, it's always making a noise, and actually when he talks, it sort of harmonises with him. And the thing is, when we first meet him, he's obviously a likeable lad, Glod and Cliff befriend him, but then it's almost like he's gone for most of the books, and it does sort of say, because it's not his life anymore, the music has him. So most of the time between shows, what happens on stage is just this whole blur, and then the rest of the time, Glod and Cliff are worried about him, he's their friend, but they sort of realise he's not really present or there, he's just because they go on tour around different towns in the Stowe Plains before the festival, partly to get out of the reach of the Musicians Guild, although they do try a few things. It was interesting because we see different towns, including like a one-horse town and stuff like that, and go to Quirm. And all this whole thing with various towns are trying to keep them out and ban them from the town, which again I think is like an early rock and roll thing.
Yeah.
But they sort of always manage to play, and everyone goes crazy wherever they are.
And then have to leave very quickly.
Glod keeps decorating hotel rooms and making them nicer. He's I'm just going to paint this now. But what happens is Susan always appears at their shows, and she stops the assassins or the music guild or the mobsters from getting to him, and they do have some conversations, but they're sort of a little bit unsatisfying, and Susan's there saying, I know he's important.
Yeah, so as she goes throughout going, that was the first time she sees Buddy. It's I know him, which I think is partly why she kind of thinks I have to save him, as well as the whole background.
We'll get to it, yeah.
So it's this idea that she knows him, which goes throughout. It's he's special, he's important. We don't really see much in the book. They don't have much of a.
It feels less straightforward than with Morton Kelly.
Yeah. But I think that's sort of hinting at things that never came about as kind of plot lines.
Yeah.
There's Death talks about towards the end. You have the memory. You have the memory of everything.
Yeah. So what Susan does is she needs to get advice on the situation, and I mean Albert's not much help, and nor are the various animal companions. So she goes to a time when she knows her grandfather is. So she actually goes into the past, because time doesn't go the same way in Death's domain, and that's the interesting bit. You get basically it explains the end of Mort, because in Mort it's a bit like Death turns over Mort's hourglass and laughs, and then suddenly we jump to sometime later and people getting married, and you're like, what just happened here? And this, I think, is Pratchett explaining that in the...
fitting in some sort of, justification. Yeah.
Retroactively kind of make it make a little more sense. And again, this is the one bit Mort that's in the cartoon.
Yeah.
So when I read Mort, that was the one bit where I could actually hear, because Christopher Lee is the voice of Death in the cartoon, so just that one bit of Mort I could hear in Christopher Lee's voice, whereas much more of this is that. But yes, Death sees Susan, realises who she is, because she looks like both a father and a mother, realises, well... And I think then, because he knows she exists, or he now remembers her, because part of the point is he can remember the future, he turns Mort's hourglass over and then makes everyone disappear, and then they have a chat in which Susan consults with him a bit like, what's happening with this guy? Yeah. And this weird hourglass with the sort of music in it and stuff.
Yeah, and then at the end, when you have the memory of the, you have had access to my memory, which I can remember everything, and the idea that later on it's Susan and Imp in the future are going to be, she's important. He's important to her in the future, and
she, while she's doing the Death role, has access to greater memories because part of the point, which we'll get to shortly, Death remembers everything, even stuff that hasn't happened yet. Although, as Albert says, he often remembers it wrong.
Yeah.
Which feels a little bit like in Good Omens with Agnes Nutter, in that she sort of remembers the future, but she doesn't understand what she's seeing. Yeah. And I think with Death, there might be, in a different way, but I think there might be a little bit of that.
Yeah.
It feels like it's in there. But yes, it's the first of this theme with Susan books, where it's a bit like, oh, there's this guy. It's like, and then what happened? Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, setting Susan up and then basically forgetting about the guy for the next appearance.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's good that Susan's more important, but it does feel kind of unsatisfying.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing is that in the start of the book, there's a bit where Imp could have gone to Quirm or he could have gone to Ankh-Morpork. He's at a fork in the road, because presumably Clamodos is somewhere between the two, or at least the road is. And Quirm would have been sensible. It's a smaller city. You can perhaps build things up. You can make him a name for yourself. But no, Ankh-Morpork. I don't think they call it the Big Wahoonie yet, but that's coming.
Yeah.
The big city. So he goes there. It's like, well, maybe we've differently gone to Quirm. And what we didn't mention before is that Susan's at school in Quirm.
Yeah.
Her boarding school is in Quirm. This is where the dreadful joke is, because at the very end, after it's all sorted, Susan goes back to school because she's going to finish her education. And they mentioned before the girls quite often, when they go into town, like to go to the chip shop.
Yes, because two women that run the school believe in healthy food. Yeah. So, so the idea of some very unhealthy fish and chips is very appealing to young ladies.
Well, it's contraband, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what happens is her friend, or Gloria, the dwarf, goes, quite a few girls have gone down to the chip shop. It's the Nuba working there. I'd swear he's Elvish. Which is also a joke on Kirsty MacColl's song, there's a guy who works down the chip shop, swears he's Elvis.
Yeah.
Which I didn't realise, so a friend of ours pointed out that was the joke at the end. You're like, oh, for goodness sake. Which is, yes, a song by Kirsty MacColl, and presumably a joke that was being built to this entire time.
Yep.
So there we go, well done.
Yeah, because obviously what Death does is, at the end, because the ending is a very much a mirroring of Susan's parents' death.
Yeah, because they again, their deaths depicted at the beginning, like the carriage goes off the cliff, falls to the dry river road below.
Explodes.
Explodes. In the cartoon, they actually depict it more than in the book. And again, it's this rock and roll thing. They're going on too fast on a tight corner. I mean, there's a whole genre of rock music, which is a bit like, a girl falls in love with the leader of a bikie gang and then he dies tragically, presumably before anything too bad can happen to her.
Depends on your level.
And again, the whole thing, live fast, die young. The music actually says the songs he never got to sing will be the greatest songs of all.
Yeah.
The idea of the music dying too young. You got the 23 Club.
You've got the Susan's parents dying at the start. You've got this happening.
This mad carriage dash.
Yeah. So
which
they're trying to kind of intercept and stop with Susan on Binky and Death on a motorcycle, which has been built by the librarian.
Largely out of other bones and things, I think.
Yes, because it's magic.
I mean, that's very much the cover image because it is very cool looking.
It's powered by the music, so it doesn't need a proper shape.
Yeah.
They're supposed to that they die in this big blaze of glory, and so instead, after Death has a bit of a fight with the music, the decision that Death does is basically we go down the different trials and leg of time, and instead Imp went to Quirm.
Yeah.
And that's how reality shifts around it.
There's none of this weird bubble stuff this time.
No, he just went to Quirm.
You say Death has a fight with the music. He plays the guitar.
Yes.
But he is also, Death.
Yeah.
So, again, it's quite cool visually. I suppose that brings us on to Susan and Death and what they're reacting to in this book. And I feel like it's probably quite fitting to talk about this today. For today, when we're recording, it is 10 years since the death of Sir Terry Pratchett, which...
I would pour one out, but I then would have to wipe up the floor, so just imagine I'm pouring one out for Terry Pratchett.
As a big theme of this book is grief.
Yes, it's triggered. The events are triggered by the death of Morton Isabel.
Yeah. And
it's looking at how two people react to it. At the start, when the head teacher is talking about how she told Susan she was expecting wails and, emotion.
She's had to give this kind of news before. Yeah, and Susan sort of didn't respond. She just went,
okay.
And kind of just did you understand what I told you?
Yes, I did. And in some respects, and I don't think she's acting on it logically, but...
I mean, the problem with saying something as logic...
Well, you
can't put logic onto that. No. And even what most people think of as logic is just a way of people being like, well, clearly the emotion that I am having is very right and correct and according to maths.
What I mean
in fact, I think Pratchett himself said logic's way of being wrong using maths.
Consciously, not logically, consciously. Mm-hmm. She's not consciously trying to save Imp because she couldn't save her parents, but... she's trying to save Imp because her parents have died.
Yeah. Well, when she's doing the duty initially, she ends up taking this horrible old man who lived a very long time and was clearly incredibly unpleasant, and whose family gather around but are like glad he's gone. And then he's like, well, I didn't give the money to them, I left it to the cat. And then she has to take this young warrior, and you get some Valkyries, which is sort of fun, briefly. But there's this young warrior who seems perfectly nice. She's like, well, why is this horrible man living ages and this pleasant guy sort of dying in battle when he's so young? And of course, Imp's even younger, and, there's that sort of thing of having, I think, some sort of attraction to him. And then she's a bit like, well, no, actually, this is silly and it shouldn't work this way. And the good should have long lives and the bad should die young. And I mean, I think if she'd put her mind to anything broader than that, she would have been quite terrifying.
Yes.
Quite terrifying. But she ends up just fixating on Imp. And this does at least have the thing, because in Reaper Man, and it does actually reference this, like, he retires, so death stops. That doesn't happen.
No.
And obviously when Mort does it, some stuff goes wrong, but it kind of describes death as a bit like being a monarchy. And it's kind of funny. It's a bit like, you are at all times, and we are too, the subject of the monarch, but none of us is actually having to do anything. It's a bit like the Queen doesn't come round to your house and insist you give her the best chair and control the remote. We don't have to do anything. King Charles doesn't have to do anything, but we are his subjects.
Yeah.
It's just happening. So it's kind of like the death bit is just a bit like, I guess, the ribbon cutting bit or something. Death as a function continues, but death, the anthropomorphic personification, is gone. But somebody gets pulled in to do like that part of it. Although I don't get the sense Susan's doing much of that either. I think it's just sort of managing. Or I think unless the death of rats is trying to cover things a bit.
Possibly, yeah.
Because at least, the death of rats is just, I think, trying to hold things together whilst also not being able to speak human and finding it all a bit more complicated than rats.
I mean, it's very more complicated than rats.
Yeah. But the fact that Death disappears and says he wants to forget because he can remember everything. And the bit early on where it depicts the carriage accident and then Death turns to an unseen person and goes, yes, I could have done something. And then later we discover that's Susan, because she goes and watches it. Because she'd known it had happened and she knew where, but she hadn't seen it. Yeah. And then she goes and sees it. And I think it's displacement. She's distracting herself from the grief over her parents by like, well, I'm just going to put things right and I'm going to save this guy. And then the fact that obviously it says in the book, history has certain resonances, like that he's, Imp and the band are, it's the same corner that their car is heading towards. She's not a very emotional person. She's very, I think, inward looking anyway. And I think she almost, there's several times where she almost gets annoyed at herself for having emotions.
Yeah.
Which... I think that's one of the things that it's kind of partly relatable but partly unlikable.
Yeah.
A bit like, well, I shouldn't be feeling like this. Which I think people do a lot anyway, but I think sometimes it's put on girls in an odd way because you're almost expected to be emotional. So you're a bit like, well, I'm not going to be silly like that.
Yeah.
And this thing, Susan's very against silliness.
Yes, yeah.
And a lot of silliness is a bit like, what you mean your natural reaction to something terrible happening in your family? That's fine.
I think later on it morphs into a much more practical aspects rather than that. She's annoyed with sinners. She's annoyed with. She deals with everything very practically. But that's in later books.
Yeah, but Death. Because Death must have taken them. He must have done.
Yeah,
he did, and he could have done something.
He didn't need. I like you're saying
about... It's weird not to be there for your daughter.
Well, I think that's why he's there, but I don't think he needs to... We don't see it never made depicted,
yeah.
And I think, like you're saying about the monarchy thing, I think it would have just happened because they don't. He only needs to go and take certain ones based on the duty and but he feels he has to be there to see it. He has to witness it.
And then him and Susan have this whole chat about how yes, he could have done something, and she's who he's talking to, not Isabel and Mort. But then Death explains that that's what they chose.
Yes,
they didn't. He could have offered them immortality, but it would have been something like his domain, like timeless. Isabel already had, like, she was 16 for like 32 years.
Yeah,
or something?
I mean, she existed there long enough to know that she didn't want to go back to that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Moore was kind of deaf for a little bit and understood him.
I mean, if you think about it, you're 32. Living 32 endlessly is possibly better than living 16 endlessly.
Good Lord, yeah.
But still,
yeah. Well, we said before about how her childhood had very 2020 feelings, and it was obviously very isolating. You were just stuck in the house with the people who lived there, and you couldn't go anywhere or do anything. And also the fact that Death turned Mort's lifetime over, and he was 16.
Yeah.
Which, and I mean, even at the end of Mort, there's speculation. It's like, well, does that mean how long? It's like, maybe not think about it.
I have this sneaky suspicion they knew it was, but Mort knew.
It's mentioned at the wedding. It's sort of measured, is that how much time I have left? And I think they just wanted to make use of the time they had. Like, they kind of knew it was that. I mean, I suppose Isabel might not have done, but they kind of knew it was that. Yeah. But then there's the thing about Death remembering stuff that happens in the future, which, because it's always a bit weird. Why did he adopt a girl? Why did he have an apprentice? But is it because he knew Susan would come at some point?
I mean, potentially. I mean, Susan does become quite a linchpin on a couple of, later, the later she's kind of very much required to be there to save the world.
Yeah. Well, I think it's that thing Albert says about Death. Yeah, he remembers the future, but he remembers it wrong. So if he just sees bits of stuff. Yeah, Death's trying to forget, which he can't do because it's painful. Susan's trying to control things and save someone to make up for that. So yeah, it is...
So underneath this silly story about rock music in a fantasy world, it is very poignantly about grief towards the end. It's not literally at the end, because that's the joke about the chip shop. When she goes back to her room, the room was silent except for the sound of 9 girls breathing quietly and the rhythmic ruffling avalanche that was Princess Jade's asleep. And after a while, the sound of someone sobbing and trying not to be heard. It went on for a long time, for there was a lot of catching up to do. Yeah. So... Far above the world, Death nodded. You could choose immortality or you could choose humanity. You had to do it for yourself. Yeah,
it is. It's kind of underneath and it kind of comes up at the end. And I mean, there's a few bits in this where you've got these... he does this in a lot of his books where it's like, oh, this is a fun story and maybe that's not the themes, and there'll just be like an odd little bit that's absolutely gut-punching, like Death sees a lot of kids.
Yes.
And you're like, good Lord. But yeah. So shall we end on a slightly positive note with all of the silly puns?
Yes, we'll end on a lighter note.
So first, I want to do a shout out to Asphalt, who is a troll that Dibbler hires to take the band on tour, and he's always been entertainment. And he's a troll, and he's called Asphalt, but he's confusingly long and flat because an elephant sat on him when he worked at the circus, I think twice. Yes. But it's just the fact that he's long and flat called Asphalt, and you're like, oh, he's the roadie.
Yep.
There's also the fact that, again, he's someone with a very distinctive voice in the cartoons. There's various points where Glod's saying something, he's like, yes, Mr. Glod. Yes, Mr. Glod. No, Mr. Glod. So his was a voice that was quite strong. Various other bands, people get excited about music and rocks in, they go and buy a load of guitars. The guitar maker starts making really crappy guitars because they don't care.
The guitar maker is Blurt Whedon with his assistant Gibson.
Yes. But yes, more bands start propping up. And there's one band who's clearly more punk than rock, mostly due to, I think, lack of any kind of skill at music. And yes, Dibbler's putting together lineups, so they keep changing their name. The Surreptitious Fabric, I figured out, was the Velvet Underground. We're certainly dwarves. They might be giants. The band that keeps changing their name go for also The Whom.
Very grammatical.
Lead Balloon. There's the Def Leppard.
Yes, so there's a whole bit about the punk band that keeps changing their name. He was going to get leopard print trousers, so he bought a leopard from a circus because it was deaf. So yes, there's a whole Def Leppard.
I think I didn't even notice that because I was just focusing on they're trying to get leopard print trousers and kind of missed that because that was quite long and convoluted.
Yeah, it is a bit convoluted, but yes.
Some of them are just like names, Boys from the Wood. Other stuff that reappears is the Eldritch Oblong joke is back because it's been a while between that. I think that comes up a few times.
I mean, there's lots of musical reference in here that we can't go through them all.
The fact that the one of the second clubs they play at is the Cavern.
Yes, there's Beatles references. I mean, lots, Stones reference. Yeah, there's lots of references to things, and I'm sure ones we've missed because our musical knowledge is not necessarily, broad. And I'm sure Sir Terry did his research well, or at least it had a reasonable knowledge of. I mean, he made a Def Leppard joke. It's as with Discworld books, they are comedy, and he is definitely making the most out of perhaps a little bit more than in moving pictures.
Oh no, I feel like I got it more in moving pictures than this, if I'm honest.
Possibly, but I feel like this is.
I think it's more embedded in this, so there's less need for it to be sort of have so many standout little bits, which I feel like moving pictures had more of.
Yeah. So yes, it's great fun. As always, this is another book that definitely rewards having been read in sequence.
Yeah, well, you need to at least have read Mort first.
It does recap at the start, Mort, briefly,
and it does show the one relevant bit of Mort at the end.
Yes, but I think you get so much more out of it.
I think the parallels and stuff as well.
Yeah,
she's her father's daughter in some ways,
and definitely going forwards, you definitely need to have read this for the Susan related books.
It sets Susan up. I don't know. I think you can take it later as like Susan's this odd character. Like that's fine.
Yeah. As always, go read it because it's good. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up here. So next time we are back to Rincewind.
Oh, are we?
And some interesting times. And I have to say, the proverb that gets mentioned at the start of Interesting Times could not be
way too relevant.
Yeah.
We'll guess that.
I would like to live in less interesting times, please.
Anyway.
Thank you all very much for listening.
Yes, thank you very much.
See you next time. Thank you for listening to Dining Table Discworld. You can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Dining Table Discworld. You can also find us on BlueSky at dtdiscworld. All our other contact information and credits for our music can be found in our show notes. Thank you for listening again, and we'll see you in our next episode.